Good evening. This is the July 2023 Metroplex of Institute of Origin Science meeting. And I'm just glad you're here. My name is David Bassett. We're going to be talking about fossilized human footprints. This is a global phenomenon, not unique just to Creation Evidence Museum where I work, or the Glen Rose area, even though those prints are famous. We'll spend time on that this evening and also the next meeting. But before we start, let me just show you this particular picture. Let me ask you, if you'll see this one again. Are these fossilized human footprints, or are these modern prints in mud? Fossilized human footprints in stone are modern prints in mud. Okay, just look at that and we'll go on. So tonight, the global phenomenon, not of stone, but of fossil human footprints in stone. This is one of the limestone ledges of the Glen Rose area, and you see the Flexi River there in the background. Most of the presentation will be based, especially when we get to foreign countries and other continents, on this particular book. Dr. Aaron Judkins is the author. See him there on the right. And this is his book, Evolution of Human Fossil Footprints. I highly recommend this book to you. He says you can actually go to his website, which you see there, www.aaronjudkins.com, if you're interested. It's 17 chapters. The first 15 chapters deal with evolution, one of the most scathing rebukes of evolutionism I've ever read. Aaron doesn't pull any punches. He tells you exactly the weaknesses of evolution, the way evolutionists think, the evidence against evolution, just on and on for 15 chapters. Chapter 16 deals with the uniqueness of the human footprints, kind of a transition chapter into chapter 17, which is the fossil human print chapter. Chapter 17 is about 20 to 22% of the entire book, that very last chapter. But it's well worth your investment if you're interested in this particular topic. Some of the prints we're going to be looking at are on the right. I try to color code them with the geologic time scale. We, of course, don't believe in the geologic time scale as young Earth creationists. But this is the Bible, of course, of the evolutionist. And instead of Testament, chapter, book, verse, they deal with eon, era, period, epoch there. Notice third from the top under the MA, which is the abbreviation for millions of years. It's 2.4 there. 2.4 is the cutoff where modern human is supposed to have begun. Our supposed ape ancestor precedes that around 4 to 3 million years ago. The Australopithecus afarensis, or better known as Lucy, would be in the Pliocene, that yellow box there, labeled the Pliocene. But as far as modern human, evolutionists restrict us to the Pleistocene, which they typically call the Ice Age period there. But you notice we have also on the right 6 different continents: North America, South America, Australia, Africa, Asia, Europe. And then here near the bottom there in that purplish fuchsia color is the Meister print, which is out of Utah. It's now owned by the Creation Evidence Museum. We'll talk about that. And it's dated as Cambrian. And the reason it's dated as Cambrian, can anybody guess?
Falls in the top Cambrian level.
The index fossil that's found in the sandal are trilobites, which evolutionists automatically date any trilobite rock as Cambrian. So we'll be reinterpreting the time scale as we go along, but this is kind of where we're going. All right. So first of all, we have to figure out where is man in the history of the Earth. Is man at the very beginning, near the beginning of the history of the Earth, or is he at the very end of the geological time scale you saw on that previous slide? A few seconds before midnight, the PM, or a few seconds, maybe a minute or so after midnight, if you compressed all of geologic time, all of Earth history, into a 24-hour period, where would we be in relationship to straight up midnight? According to God's Word, Jesus talking there in Mark chapter 10, verse 6, he says, "But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female." We're not going to get into the gender question tonight, but you kind of see there are only 2 there, right? And we're here from the very beginning. Evolutionary deep time says, well, okay, let's take that 2.4 million years that we talked about earlier. So divided by the supposed evolutionary age of the Earth, which is 4.54 billion years, that comes out to be 0.00053 or 0.053%. And if you compress that into a 24-hour day, man supposedly evolves 45 seconds before midnight. So almost the entire day has come and gone, and just 45 seconds before midnight, man arrives on the scene. There. These are definitely opposite viewpoints. Johns Hopkins University professor, evolutionist Stephen Stanley, back here in 1981, said this: any topsy-turvy sequence of fossils would force us to rethink our theory. Any topsy-turvy sequence. Yet not a single one has come to light. I'm thinking at this point, has he even looked at the fossil record? As Darwin recognized, a single geographic inconsistency would have nearly the same power of destruction. The reason he says this is because evolution is supposed to be one-directional. It only goes from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced. There's not supposed to be any reversals in the evolutionary order of organisms. Evolutionist Niles Eldredge, just 1 year later, says this. He's from the American Museum of Natural History. We have been looking at the fossil record as a general test of the notion that life has evolved. To falsify that general idea, we would have to show that forms of life we considered more advanced appear earlier than the simpler forms, right? We need a reversal in that evolutionary order. Recognize this gentleman? Richard Dawkins, right? The foremost, most outspoken atheist right now on the planet, from the University of Oxford, says we should be very surprised to find fossil humans appearing in the record before mammals are supposed to have evolved. Right? Mammals are supposed to precede humans. If a single well-verified mammal skull were to turn up in a 500 million year old rocks, our whole modern theory of evolution would be utterly destroyed. These people don't really mean what they say, right? Because I've already shown you the Meister print with the trilobites. We'll see that fossil coming up. But trilobites and human sandals don't go together, according to the evolution worldview. You would think that evidence of humans in the Cambrian, which is older than 500 million years, would qualify and would totally destroy the evolutionary worldview there, according to their words. Okay? But of course, that's not what they believe. I'm going to start at the top of the time scale and work our way down. This is the Pleistocene, the Ice Age period we talked about, the Pliocene there. In the Pliocene, we have the famous Laetoli Africa footprints. We'll see those in the part 2 segment that's coming up in a couple of months, actually exactly 2 months from today. They're Mary Leakey's most noteworthy discovery, according to her, of her whole career, were these Laetoli Africa footprints. Sample prints from Carson City. You see a picture of that over there. Let's go back. This has divided the community between, is this a giant man sandal print, or is this a giant ground sloth? The evolutionists, of course, picked the ground sloth. They choose Mylodon there. The shoe print from the Gobi Desert. You see some of the ribbing there on the top. It's 1959. This is kind of a weird quote because it says they discovered a fossil shoe print with a rib sole in sandstone 2 or 15 million years old. Does that make sense to you? It had European size 43, which in the United States is 9.5 to 10 size shoe. Well, not just footprints, they're all sandal prints and shoe prints. The Glen Rose prints, of course, are dated as Cretaceous. I think the number that they've settled on now, the evolutionists anyway, is about 110 million years old. You see most of those on the left half here, from the Jurassic, the Triassic. This shoe print there is from Nevada. That's the Fisher Canyon, Nevada shoe print. We'll talk more about that when we get to Nevada. There. Going down the column, the Zavada footprint is in limestone in the Robledos Mountains, which is in the Rocky Mountains north of El Paso. It's actually north of Las Cruces, New Mexico. And coffee footprints are these. These are young children, 2 different ages there. The Berea, Kentucky prints on the top right, and then the St. Louis, Missouri illustration prints there in the lower right. you looked at the titles of those last 4 slides, I put those together and I made a poem out of this. While evolution's steps trail behind, creation is a shoe-in for the truth, as both dinosaur tracks and the prints of mankind show evolution's impression to be uncouth. Well, let's look at Albert D. Ingalls. He was the editor of Scientific American, no friend of creationists. You may recognize the gentleman in the upper right corner there, Don Patton of Neos fame. Albert Ingalls says this: on sites reaching from Virginia and Pennsylvania through Kentucky, Illinois, Missouri, and westward toward the Rocky Mountains, prints similar to those shown above. I'm showing the Zapata print here from New Mexico. And from shown above, from 5 to 10 inches long, have been found on the surface of exposed rocks, and more keep turning up as the years go by. What made these prints? As yet, the answer is unknown to science. They look like human footprints, and nothing else looks like a human footprint. And it often has been said, though not by scientists, that they really are human footprints made in the soft mud before it became rock. Now, you notice it says here, he conducted a regular column on amateur astronomy, but now he's talking about geology, paleontology. He's kind of outside his element here. We'll keep using those because his quotes are interesting. If man made these prints in this manner, then man's antiquity is no matter of a mere million years or so, as scientists think, but 250 million years. For they are found in rocks of the Carboniferous period, and those rocks were laid down about 250 million years ago. This is where he's not accurate, even according to evolutionists, because Carboniferous dates about 350 million on their time scale. Carboniferous is the European designation for the Mississippi and Pennsylvanian periods here in the United States. This is the time period supposedly when the coal-bearing plants were being laid down. Okay? If man, or even his ape ancestor, or even that ape ancestor's early mammalian ancestor existed as far back as in the Carboniferous period in any shape, then the whole science of geology is so completely wrong that all the geologists will resign their jobs and take up truck driving. Hence, for the present at least, science rejects the attractive explanation, which is the obvious one, that man made these mysterious prints in the mud of the Carboniferous period with his feet. So down here at the bottom I have ex-geologist, now truck driver. The only boulder he's actually interested in seeing is Boulder, Colorado, there on the side. Fossil human footprint evidence exists, but the interpretation is based on worldview. Right? The evidence clearly shows that these footprints were made when the rocks were soft mud. Either modern man lived in the very earliest evolutionary eras of prehistory, or all rock dating must be shrunk down to a much shorter time frame, during all of which man lived. I think Albert Ingalls is right there on that latter part. Don't you agree? All rock dating must be shrunk down to a much shorter time frame, got to be compressed, during all of which man lived. Man lived through all of it, right, from the very beginning. Perhaps the most intriguing, and this is Ian Juby now. Ian Juby is a Canadian creationist, and he says, he'll be quoted in these next 2 slides, perhaps the most intriguing such fossil footprint report was that made by the head of the department at Berea College in Kentucky of a human-like track left in sandstone of the upper Carboniferous period. Now, if you're going to use the adjective upper, you don't use the word period, because period is a time unit, so it'd be better if you use the word late Carboniferous period. If you're using upper, you're talking about the rocks themselves, not the supposed period they were deposited in. So, but with that aside, he says, numerous scientists have investigated these tracks and concluded that they are genuine, even going so far as to count the sand grains under magnification to ensure that it was compressed at the bottom rather than carved. That mud compression is not a carvable feature. Those pressure laminations underneath the pressure points of the heel, the ball of the foot, and the toes, you cannot carve that there. In the old days, Creation Evidence Museum had to cut fossils diagonally to expose maximum surface area to see mud compression. Today, we don't have to deface the fossil. We can use CT scan or CAT scan technology to actually scan the layers and actually see the mud compression that way. Ingalls suggested that they were made by some unidentified amphibian, because amphibians are supposed to be the dominant life form during the Carboniferous period. But a human-sized Carboniferous amphibian is just about as problematic for evolutionary timetables as humans in that era. see my human frog over here. Ian Juby continues by saying, however, in an attempt to dismiss these tracks, the Scientific American article, of which Ingalls was editor, did not include the real photos in their article, instead showing some pretty obvious fakes, probably Indian carvings, and not the actual prints, which they had access to. Why would they not show the real tracks? Because this evidence is highly problematic to their worldview, the theory of evolution. As evolutionist atheist Richard Dawkins observed, authenticated evidence of humans and the Carboniferous would blow the theory of evolution out of the water. And it would. This is the Meister print, the one that had the trilobites in it. We have a trilobite here. We also have a trilobite here. As we'll say later, we're not looking at a left and right. We're looking at a top and bottom. The bottom is over here on the left. The top is on the right. This is a slab, counter slab that's been opened up. The Arathia gingai trilobite, which is the world's most common trilobite, is the index fossil for the Cambrian period. Right? The oldest fossil footprint yet found was discovered, and it's only oldest if you believe in the time scale, discovered on June 1st, 1968 by William J. Meister within the famous Wheeler Shale at Antelope Springs, 43 miles west of Delta, Utah. The sample that seems to have crushed a living trilobite was 10 1/4 inches long, 3.5 inches wide. The heel is indented slightly more than the sole, as a human shoe print would be. We tend to kind of lean more than put our weight on one side of our shoes than the other. Over time, our heels are not going to be symmetrical anymore. They're going to be worn on one side more than the other. Arathia kingai, the most common trilobite in the world, is the index fossil for the so-called Cambrian period. And they've changed the numbers on the Cambrian period. It's now dated, Darwin dated, it's 542 to 480 million years old. They would say this fossil is about 530 million years old. Yeah.
Now, would that print have been made in the early days of the flood when trilobites were washed up on the land? And
that's exactly the way we would interpret that. Yeah. Trilobites live on the bottom of the ocean, on the sea floor. Last I checked, we don't walk on the bottom of the ocean in our sandals. So the only way you can get a trilobite under a sandal print is to bring the ocean over the continent, which is exactly what Genesis said. And this more than likely would be in the early days of the flood, since the other flood sediments are above the Cambrian sediments there. So this person might have lived closer to the coast of the pre-flood world. Don't know. That's just a speculation, but that would be a better interpretation of what the evolutionists have got. They've got not just a time problem, because this fossil blows over 500 million years off their time scale by putting humans at the top and trilobites at the bottom together, but they've also got an environmental problem, don't they? Because we've got marine mixing here between an ocean creature and, of course, man, a continental creature. So this is the representative of the Cambrian, supposedly, the Meister sandal print. But trilobites aren't restricted to just the Cambrian, supposedly. This trilobite was found in Cretaceous limestone of Glenrose at the Paluxy River, found by geologist, late old-timer Beatrice Moss with her daughter, Jeannie Mack. At that time, Jeannie was curator of the Somerville County Museum in Glenrose. And if you've ever visited the County Museum in Glenrose decades ago, you probably met her. She's now deceased, though. At that time, Jeannie was curator of the Somerville County Museum. She insisted strenuously to Clifford Wilson, who's a biblical archaeologist from Australia, that the trilobite was found in the middle of dinosaur tracks, with dinosaur footprints above and below the ledge where the trilobite was found. So here we have a trilobite in what the evolutionists would consider Cretaceous rock there. So not all trilobites are restricted to the Cambrian. So let's go back and look at our time scale again. This would be a more biblical way of looking at it. Starting here at the bottom, microscopic fossils and chemical precipitates in the pre-flood world. After creation week rocks, which are in the lower left corner, are deposited on day 3. We have 1,656 years between creation and the flood, according to Genesis chapter 5. That's when these microscopic fossils, chemical precipitates, the stromatolites, just fossilized algae, would be in the fossil record down here. And then here we have the Cambrian and the first marine invertebrates. Marine invertebrates are not just there, they're all through the column. Every single layer has marine invertebrate fossils. marine invertebrate fossils, or even the top of Mount Everest. Marine invertebrate fossils, some of those organisms are still alive today there. And then we have fish fossils, amphibian, reptile, dinosaur, not because they're evolving and morphing into one kind to another kind, but because this is an ecological zonation scheme. Marine fossils are first because the flood starts at the bottom of the ocean, but the fountains of the great deep breaking up in Genesis 7:11. Super hot water coming up from below. Volcanic activity also coming up from below. And then we have the waters inundating the coasts. So amphibians would be next. And then reptiles, which are a little more mobile than amphibians, but less mobile than mammals, they would be next. Dinosaurs have more of a mammalian posture. Their legs are up under vertically, up under their center of gravity, just like mammals. So we would expect them to be next to mammals. And then humans, we would hope, would have the intelligence to get to higher ground, climb high trees, mountains, get on boats, get on top of buildings, whatever they have to do to escape rising floodwaters. But eventually, they're going to be covered as well, especially by day 150. And then after the floodwaters recede, we have the Ice Age, residual catastrophism, up there in the Pliocene, Pleistocene, because of the flood itself. The flood is the responsible cause for the Ice Age. It caused the warmer oceans and the cooler continents, which are the two conditions you have to have an Ice Age there. So this is the way we would look at it more biblically. So that's the fossil record. The rock record, of course, we see the flood begins at day 1. We have creation week rocks at the very bottom. Those large cobble-sized, boulder-sized would be probably where the great unconformity is located. You can see this at the Grand Canyon and elsewhere. This is a worldwide time break between pre-flood and flood. There, ark floats, day 40, according to Genesis 7. So now the waters are on the continent by that time, deep enough to actually lift the ark. The flood days 40 to 90. We have coal-forming sediments during that period of time. Then we have days 90 to 150. The flood peaks at day 150. Everything's covered in water by day 150, all the high hills and mountains. The flood ends day 315, thereabouts, and then it takes quite a long time for the earth to dry out, 221 days after the peak, for a total of 371 days. And then the Ice Age, according to Michael J. Ord, who is the ex-weatherman, now creation flood geologist, he believes the Ice Age consisted of 500 years of glacial maximum of snow compacting into continental glaciers thick enough where they can move under their own weight. That's at the end of the 500 years, and then 200 years after that of meltback, of recession. Earth would have been covered about 30% in ice. Today it's only 10% ice. So this is not a global event per se. It'd be more of a glacial event in the higher latitudes, and more of a pluvial or rainfall event near the equator. This kind of coincides with Genesis 13, when Abraham and Lot are looking over the Jordan River Valley, and the biblical text says it's like the Garden of Eden there. And so it's very lush, very green. Sahara would have been very green as well during that time period. Things have changed since the Ice Age has ended, and now we have this desert wasteland. The megasequences, the flood geology megasequences here, the Sauk, Tippecanoe, Kaskaskia, Absarica, Tim Clary's pronunciation, if you remember, Zuni, and then Tejas. Those first 5 are the floodwaters over the continent. The Sauk, Tippecanoe, Kaskaskia, all marine fossils, all Grand Canyon fossils, so Paleozoic, okay, from the Permian down. And then the Absarica and Zuni, this is where the continent gets inundated. All the amphibians, the reptiles, the dinosaurs, the mammals, the humans are in the Absarica and Zuni, right in there. The exception may have been that Cambrian sandal print. And then the Tejas is the water coming off the flood, off the continents, there at the very end, the recession of the flood. Most flood geologists put the post-flood boundary between the Paleogene and Neogene up there at the top. Okay. So the verses, there's correlation there as well. The very bottom there, Genesis 7, says that the waters of the great deep were upon the earth. So the subterranean water is now on the surface of the earth, mixing with the pre-flood ocean. Genesis 7:17b says the waters increased, the waters prevailed, the waters increased greatly, the waters prevailed exceedingly. So we're getting higher and higher, farther and farther inland. Genesis 7:19b and 20 now says that all the high hills were covered, all the mountains were covered. Everything that's not in the ark, land living, is dead. And then the Teos, divided into two segments there, and this is interesting geologically. You don't get this from the English. In verse 3 and verse 5 of chapter 8, it uses the word continually. Water's coming off continually. But the Hebrew is totally different. In Genesis 8:3, it is more of a scouring sheet wash action. Of going down and coming back, but not as far back. And then going down and coming back, ebb and flow, but a downward ebb and flow. Scouring and sheet wash. And we see that. We see that happening with the Mesozoic and Cenozoic sediments in the Grand Canyon, because there aren't any. It's only Paleozoic. Where did all that hundreds of feet go? It was totally scoured off. You have to go to Zion National Park or Bryce National Park up in Utah to get the Mesozoic and Cenozoic sediments. Between the Rockies and the Appalachians, more scouring would have taken place during Genesis 8:3, and toward southward toward the Mississippi River Delta is what we have today. But those offshore oil rigs that are in the Gulf of Mexico, they're drilling into what's called the Whopper Sand, a huge sand deposit down underneath the Gulf of Mexico, which is almost pure sand there. Evolutionists can't really explain how that happened. It would have happened because of the recession between the Rockies and the Appalachians at the end of the flood. There. What about the continental shelves? Continental shelves around each continent are almost perfectly flat. There's just a slight, like 5-degree tilt there, but they're almost flat. So that shows scouring action. And at the end of those, on the continental slopes, you see the submarine canyons of Genesis 8:5. Genesis 8:5 is a down-cutting, canyon-cutting formation. Water motion there. And so Genesis perfectly matches the geologic record. All right, let's transition now to the human foot, because our topic is footprints. So let's do a little bit of anatomy here. Here we have a side view and a top view of the human foot. You can see the ankle bone is called the talus there, and the largest bone of the foot is the heel, which is the calcaneum bone right here. The foot and ankle contain 26 bones, 33 joints, more than 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. Did you realize all that was in your foot? The major bones of the human foot are the navicular bone. You kind of see that particular bone is at the top of the foot, top middle of the foot. Below that is the cuboid bone, the cuneiform, with the 3 bones in the middle of the foot. The phalanges, of course, are the toes. Calcaneus, that's our heel bone, the largest bone in the foot. Talus is the ankle bone. The cuboid is right here below that, right in the middle of the foot. And the metatarsals are the bones between the cuboid and the phalanges. So you kind of see how we're all constructed there. Looking at the ankle joint, the talus bone forms the lower part of the ankle joint needed for bipedalism. So this is very important. This bipedalism. Evolutionists kind of stray away from this because this is one of the inconsistencies in their model, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It also transmits the entire weight of the body to the foot. So you notice that one reason why the heel is the largest bone, because the leg shafts are going straight down toward the heel and the ankle. The ankle bone is in Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, tilts backward. But the talus in the human tilts forward, like that. Totally opposite direction. And we need that in order to walk upright. This and other differences between Lucy and human beings are very evident, and according to this New Scientist article, unmistakable. So comparing ourselves to apes, as far as locomotion, these are some of the major differences between humans and apes. We have a foramen magnum. That's the opening at the base of the skull that the spinal column uses to reach the brain. There. Foramen magnum opens straight down, not at an angle. We have a curved lumbar spine. We have 2 curves in our spine. So we have an S-shaped spine, whereas apes are kind of bent over. They have a C-shaped spine. We have a short flared ilium, which is one of the bones of the hips. Apes have long and thin iliums. Okay? The ilium is one of 3 bones that make up the hip: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis bone. We have a strong, robust talus. Remember, that's the ankle bone. A strong, non-opposable big toe. I underline non-opposable. That means it's straight with the other toes. It doesn't come off to the side like a thumb. It sticks off on the side. So the thumb would be opposable because we can touch all the other fingers with the thumb. Apes have an opposable big toe. We have a complex 2A, longitudinal and transverse arch system. We actually have 3 arches in the foot: medial longitudinal arch, lateral longitudinal arch, and anterior transverse arch. It would appear that our entire skeleton was purposely designed for bipedalism, especially our backbone, our pelvis, and our feet. Looking at the heel, the human calcaneus is 4 times the size of a gorilla heel and twice that of a chimpanzee. This is because the human heel contains a lot of spongy bone that absorbs the shock of walking. That's a design feature. The heel strike of humans is much more prominent during bipedal walking than that of great apes. So we lead with our heel. So the heel hits first, and then the ball of the foot, and then we lift off with our toes as we're walking in this bipedal posture. Bipedal walking is a quite complex action that is performed by the peripheral nervous system, which consists of the somatic or voluntary nervous system and the autonomic or involuntary nervous system. This raises a very important question. How did the hominids evolve such intricate nervous systems and spinal structures? As far as the nervous system, it's that second toe, the toe next to your big toe, which has more nerve endings than any other toe. That's the toe the brain is sending signals to when we're getting ready to change direction, or we're trying to balance, or we're shifting weight. And the information goes to that second toe. That second toe is protected by the great toe on the other side. There is no compound, hybrid, middle, or intermediate stride between quadrupedalism and bipedalism. You're either 4-footed or you're 2-footed. There is no transition between those there. And that's an important point. In fact, such a transitional stride is not even biomechanically possible. In 1996, computerized research by Liverpool University's Robin Hugh Crompton, senior lecturer of anatomy, concluded that in order for a living being to use its energy optimally, it can either walk upright, like humans, or on all fours. They cannot do both because of the extreme energy consumption issues involved with and between the pushing and swinging stages of locomotion. So all these pictures down here on the bottom are these reconstructions, he says, are the product of an imagination. They don't actually happen. There's no quadrupedal to bipedal transition. True forensic science does not allow for this great leap of faith in the search for truth. Since biomechanics commits a creature to either a predominantly horizontal or vertical posture, one or the other, with no option for an intermediate stance or gait, the supposed evolution of bipedal man from an alleged quadrupedal ape-like ancestor is precluded. And the icon that we see of 4-footed or quadrupedal ape and then gradually rising up to modern human, that's a total myth. It's not even biomechanically possible. Our bipedalism, therefore, can never be the end result of Darwinian gradual development. Notice this next point, number 4. Bipedalism is not an evolutionary advantage. Walking upright is not an advantage from an evolutionary perspective. Our erect posture makes us one of the most vulnerable and unprotected of all species in nature in terms of movement and defense. Apes move much easier, faster, more efficiently on the ground and in the trees than does man. Natural selection would have eliminated our lineage by sentencing our theoretical brute ancestor to extinction. This is one of the biggest contradictions within the evolution model itself. The upright posture and obligatory bipedalism of man is a unique characteristic only of human beings. Our erect stance is the most substantial factor that distinguishes humans from apes. Indeed, morphologically speaking, it is the most distinctive criterion that separates mankind from all the animal kingdom. When people go to the zoo, they may see an ape that looks like somebody they know, facially, but they're not looking at the posture there. Apes can sort of walk on 2 legs for a limited time, but then they have to drop down. because their spine and their feet are not made for bipedalism. Their ankle bone is not in the right direction. Their spinal column is not in the right direction for constant bipedalism. There. So this is one thing that distinguishes us from other primates. Here's a simple test. Which footprint is human? It's a simple test because the answer is given right here, right? And it should be obvious which one's the human print. But you notice the ape footprint looks more like a hand. Humans are the only toed creature that lacks opposable toes. Right? We don't have one toe that can touch all the other toes. In humans, the big toe is straight in line with the other toes in order to facilitate bipedal walking. The great toe in pungans, which is apes, is divergent, sticks off to the side. Position similar to our thumb, but used by apes to aid in grasping and climbing. Apes essentially have an extra pair of hands instead of having feet. They really don't have 2 hands and 2 feet. They have 4 hands. All right, so you see only human feet up there, and you're looking at the samples of gibbon, orangutan, bonobo, etc. You can automatically tell which one's human. We're the ones without the opposable toe. The interesting thing about the feet is that all of them are clearly Homo sapien feet. This conjecture is due to the fact that all of the footprints found in the fossil record today are anatomically identical with modern man. Whether attributed to Australopithecus afarensis, Neanderthal, they are indistinguishable from modern man. Now this is cool, there are no ape, chimpanzee, or monkey footprints in the fossil record. And perplexing for evolutionists, there are no footprints clearly representing monkey to man transitional footprints. There are no transitional footprints because there's no transitional posture of any kind in the fossil record period. There's a simple reason for this. Man has always been man. You can also add apes have always been apes. Nothing more and nothing less. Right? So these are some important points down here at the bottom. As a result, fossil human footprints are consistent in form throughout the geologic column. Whether they're in the Cambrian or whether they're up there in the Pleistocene, they're consistent. The rock record shows no change in the anatomy of the human foot. Consequently, there is no morphological change in the fossil footprints of humans that can be used as evidence for the evolution of the unique human foot from ape hand-like feet, which should exist if we share a common ape-like ancestor. We should see the hand-like ape foot transitioning into the non-opposable toes of the human foot. We don't see anything like that. There are no supposed transitional footprints anywhere in the fossil record. Ichthyofossil intermediate footprints do not exist. Ichthyofossils are indirect evidence, not the body fossil, but like footprints would be an ichthyofossil. Thus, fossil human footprints look like modern human footprints. So back to my original question. Are these fossilized human footprints or are these modern? Okay, it's test time now. All right, what would you say? Who says fossil? Who says modern? These are modern. Okay, these are modern human footprints in mud. These are not in stone. It's kind of hard to tell, though, isn't it? This is what you look for when you're looking for human footprint identification, right? It's amazing how many, the amount of information you can get just by looking at a pair of or 2 or 3, 4 footprints in a row. First of all, you're looking for a general impression of the human footprint shape, because the human footprint shape is unique to barefoot humans. Consistent footprint length. The foot does not change length as we're going one step to another, so we should say a consistent footprint length, right? The same actual size of the prints. We're looking for left-right patterns. That's more helpful than just a single footprint. Repeated in series, one footprint after the other. So we should see the left great toe near the midline, and then the right great toe, and then the left great toe, and then the right great toe on the midline. Consistent stride length, because the legs don't change length either as you're walking. Your legs stay the same length as you're walking. So your stride length should be the same. Consistent directional trend going in the same direction. Deeper impression in the heel area. That's that heel strike we talked about, the impact of the heel strike. Possible sliding effect as the prints are made, caused by the foot's momentum at the end of the swing phase of the step. There's a swing phase, and then there's a push off there. Deeper impression in the ball area, also on the outside of the foot, made by the pushing tendency in stride. Right? There's a swing phase and a push phase. Mud up push, some people call it push up, between the toes, right, especially if the mud is squishy. Between the toes and or along the sides of the foot, caused by displacement of the layer into which the foot was forced. Deeper impression in the ground as the foot pushes off the ground in anticipation of the next step. So all the pressure points that have been mentioned so far are the heel, the ball of the foot, and then the toes. Big toe impression is not only clear, but is quite distinctive. It's non-opposable. And deeper, since it is used by man as a point of agility and balance. That's why it's bigger. Pressure striations or laminations, which we said were non-carvable features that follow structural contours of the feet. That's really important, especially in fossil prints, especially in Glenrose, because the skeptics love to say that Glenrose human prints are fake. Why do they say that? Because there are only 2 known human fake footprints carved during the Great Depression era by one gentleman who was trying to earn money during the Great Depression when things were rough, economically speaking. He knew the tourists and the scientists would be interested in those fossil human prints, and so he carved 2. And yet you go to evolutionary websites and even very extra cautious creationist websites, and they'll say the human prints in Glenrose basically are questionable. Well, we have documented over 90 human prints in association with about 600 dinosaur tracks in the Glenrose area. We've had secular movie studio cameras filming, lifting at limestone ledges one off the other to expose pristine human prints. And there's no way they honestly can say all these human prints are carved. But that's an easy out for them, right? Because there is that little history in the Glenrose area. Well, let's start our tour now. We started in Nevada. We've already shown you this one. This is supposedly a shoe print, a 200 million year old shoe print, discovered in the seam of coal in Fisher Canyon. 200 million years. Lest you think this is the fossil of some kind of animal whose shape merely resembles a modern shoe, close-up examination of the fossil reveals that traces of a double line of sewed stitches, so this is an intelligent human made this, double line of sewed stitches around the perimeter of the shape are clearly visible. It's about a size 13 shoe. The right side of the heel appears to be more worn down than the left. We would expect that if the shoe was worn for some length of time. This means that men wore shoes at least 200 million years ago. This is from a website. This is not really a creation website, but is that true? Men wore shoes at least 200 million years ago? Of course, we don't believe in 200 million years, right? Notice what they say at the bottom, though. What becomes of the Darwinian theory in the face of this evidence that there were intelligent men on Earth millions of years before apes were supposed to have evolved? The fossils with shoe prints are a direct challenge to Darwin's theory of evolution. They indicate that there was at least one period of civilization before our civilization. What does the Bible call that? The world that then was perished. Right? 2 Peter chapter 3. And the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. The antediluvian civilization was the civilization before ours there. Well, in Utah, we've seen this one as well. This is the Meister print. And the Reader's Digest, Mysteries of the Unexplained book, has this particular fossil in it. And they say if the print is what it appears to be, the impression of a sandaled shoe crushing a trilobite, actually 2 trilobites, it would be sufficient to overturn all conventionally accepted ideas of human and geological evolution. It should be, right? But you don't see evolutionists losing any sleep over it. Mabel Meister, the widow of William Meister, who discovered the Meister print. Meister split open a 2-inch thick slab of rock with his hammer and discovered the print. The rock fell open like a book, revealing on one side the footprint itself. Right, this was a slab, counter slab. The other half of the rock slab showed an almost perfect mold of the footprint and fossils. Amazingly, the human was wearing a sandal. This is Mabel Meister. She's overlooking the Meister print there. Evolutionists, after the death of her husband, came to her and was basically trying to force her to sell that fossil for the purpose of destruction. One of her husband's dying wishes was, if it is given, it needs to be displayed for the public to see. And she did not compromise on that. And because of that, Creation Evidence Museum actually ended up acquiring it. But the Smithsonian Institution was very interested in it. Okay. So we're looking at a slab counter slab. The bottom of the sandal print is this left side. The top of the rock is on the other side there. And you see the trilobite here on the left. We see the heel line of the sandal. You can kind of maybe see where that's located. And then the other trilobite up there, the Arathia gingai trilobite. Here's a close-up. It's called a trilobite. The British pronounce it trilobite. And sometimes in the museum we hear the word trilobite. It's kind of trilobite is the way I grew up with, because tri means three. It has 3 lobes, which is why it's called a trilobite. There are 3 lobes. You can look at it longitudinally. There's a left lobe, a center lobe, and a right lobe. Or you can look at it as the head shield, which is called the cephalon. The middle portion is called the thorax. And then the tail section is called the pygidium. So it has 3 lobes, either direction you go, either front to back or left to right. They also have some of the most complicated eyes in the animal kingdom. Very compound eyes, which you can see in 360 degrees. And the lenses are made of silica, which is what glass is made of. The lenses of the eyes there. They're extremely complicated eyes there. And yet they're supposedly the possession of a very primitive life form that lived at the very bottom of the fossil record.
Why would they need complex eyes? Just to see their prey?
I believe that would be the case. They can also correct for index of refraction in different density waters there as well. There are PhD dissertations on just the physics of how the light rays enter the eye. All of that is probably beyond my pay grade.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's look at here, June 1st, 1968. Dr. H.H. Doling of Utah Geological Survey verified it was not a fake. Okay, this sandal print is genuine. Notice this quote. Mr. Meister claimed that when he had a geologist examine the print, the geologist offered him $250,000 for the print. Now, would you sell a fossil for $250,000? It'd be hard not to part with it, wouldn't it? Meister asked him, "What are you going to do with it if I sell it to you?" The geologist replied, "I'm going to destroy it. It destroys my entire life work as a geologist." So obviously he didn't sell it. He dies. Pressure's put on the widow. She doesn't sell it. Yeah, just praise the Lord for that.
Yeah.
You can come to the Creation Evidence Museum and you can see a fossil that blows 500 million years off the geologic time scale. In Mexico, this is in White Sands National Monument. These footprints have caught the interest of scientists because they say it's the longest set of human footprints dated to the Ice Age, possibly made by a young woman carrying a toddler. This is an artistic reconstruction of that scene. Additional prints hint that the duo crossed paths with a mammoth, 2 are shown here, and a ground sloth on the more than a 1.5 kilometer or 1 mile long trail. There. A set of human prints, 60, found in 7 layers of sediment, were uncovered by researchers in White Sands National Park. According to a new study, these tracks date between 21,000 to 23,000 years ago, a time when massive ice sheets are believed to have blocked human migration into the Americas. That's the conclusion of a new paper that Oregon State University Corvallis archaeologist Lauren Davis calls potentially groundbreaking. If the dates are right, the discovery would be the strongest evidence yet that people reached the Americas during the middle of the last ice age, thousands of years earlier than many archaeologists thought. Now, they say the last ice age, there's only one ice age. The evidence only supports one ice age. So creationists are monoglacial. Evolutionists are polyglacial. They say there are about 50 ice ages in the history of Earth, and the last ice age ended about 10,000 years ago. Biblically, we can't accept that. We don't even think the universe is 10,000 years old. Right? Earth and the universe, closer to 6,000 years. Probably no more than 6,200 years. That's about as far as you can stretch biblical chronology. So when they say 21,000, 23,000, yeah, well, that's interpretations based on worldview. If that's true, it's going to be a revolution in the way that we think about archaeology in the Americas. Right? Not really paleontology so much, archaeology, or even anthropology. The Zapata print of New Mexico. Known since 1929, this 9-inch long Zapata track from the Robledo Mountains in New Mexico, which is part of the Rocky Mountain chain, shows clear impressions of all 5 toes and well-defined arches of what appears to be a barefoot print of a narrow-heeled human female. And females usually have a narrower heel. In some cases, they have a rounded V-shaped heel, whereas some masculine prints show a squarish U-shaped heel. Here's Dr. Carl Baugh in his younger days with the Zapata print, and you know this guy, Dr. Don Patton, also with the Zapata print. There, close up there in the middle. The Zapata print was rediscovered in 1987 by Jerry McDonald, along with nearby fossil bird and mammal-like tracks. Now, hold on a minute. The Zapata print is dated as Permian. Remember that? I showed it earlier. 250 million years, supposedly. Limestone strata, Darwin data by evolution as being Permian in age, 290 to 248 million years, before any birds, mammals, or humans supposedly evolved. And yet it's found with bird and mammal-like tracks. This anti-evolutionary evidence was referred to in the July 1992 issue of the Smithsonian Magazine as being simply problematica. That's their word for it, okay? And this is an anomaly. It's not supposed to be there. It's an out-of-place fossil. It's problematica, okay? Because that's the scientific word for oops, you can't explain this. All right, so that brings us to Texas. We won't get through Texas tonight. Texas is too big. Okay, we'll have to finish Texas next time. But I want to get to the halfway point in the presentation. And that takes us to Glen Rose, which you know, they pride themselves on being what they call the dinosaur capital of Texas. We have Acrocanthosaurus, the 3-toed carnivore there in the center. And then the sauropod dinosaur in the upper right corner is Sauroposeidon protellus, which is the state dinosaur of Texas. Those sauropod prints have been renamed 5 times. At first, in the early 1900s, when the Glen Rose prints were first being exposed by flood action in 1908, those roundish prints were called brontosaurus. Now I have one quote where it actually says that, brontosaurus. Then the name was changed to brachiosaurus. It's a different type of sauropod dinosaur. And then it went to Pleurocoelus. And then it went to Paluxysaurus. And now it's Sauroposeidon protellus. And I think that's where it's going to stay, I think. Okay? Sauroposeidon protellus has the distinction of being the tallest dinosaur known to science. Okay? So we can say not only are things bigger in Texas, but they're taller too. Okay?
Everything's bigger.
Yep. Dinosaur footprints are made famous, though, in the 1940s. The big flood that started everything was in 1908 down in the Paluxy. Paluxy is the second fastest flowing river in Texas. Don't ask me what first is. No one ever says. They just says the Paluxy's second. I can't find what's the fastest flowing river. But in 1908, it ripped up huge limestone ledges. They have documented one flood actually lifted a limestone ledge that weighed almost 5 tons. That was 9,900 pounds, so almost 10,000 pounds. So that's the flood action can be very, very dramatic. But you see the sauropod prints here, and then you see the 3-toed tracks here of Acrocanthosaurus. So the deeper prints of the sauropod dinosaur there. Oops, let's go back. So this is Acrocanthosaurus, which means high-spined lizard. Can you see why? On the back there, a little fin right there. Acrocanthosaurus attokensis. This is the only species of this genus. There's only one species in the whole genus. And then down the bottom of the sauropod there is Sauroposeidon protellus. So those some artistic illustrations showing both of those. And here we have lifting limestone ledges on riverbanks' edges. I tried to rhyme there. A little poetic. But this is kind of the measures that people have gone to down in Glen Rose to actually expose human prints there with heavy equipment, backhoes, things like that. This is one of the ledges that has human prints. Maybe you kind of see those in the foreground. And you see the 2 that are behind her to the left. These are the ones in the foreground with the red arrows. And then there are 2 up there. And then over here in the oval, blue oval, the O.W. Willett print. This was taken out because it's kind of unique. It actually shows a human print stepping crossways across a pterosaur footprint. Pterosaurs are flying reptiles. So flying reptiles will sometimes walk in the mud, and we have a human print crossing a pterosaur print. We have this at the museum too. You can see this too. Okay. Dr. Baugh came to the Glen Rose area in March of 1982. He's working on a master's thesis in archaeology up in Missouri. He hears about the Great Man Tracks down here in the Glen Rose, Texas area. He says, well, I probably need to go research that, include that in my research, in my dissertation or thesis. And so he verifies human and dinosaur tracks together in 1982. Because of that, he says, this evidence needs to be preserved. He starts the Creation Evidence Museum in 1984. In fact, this month marks the 39th year anniversary of the museum. 39 years this month. 3 years later, it's this particular scene at the McFall site. Inmate McFall owns the property, and so they're giving them permission to dig on it. This limestone platform contained 2 dinosaur trails, 1 human print trail, named after M.E. Clark series. M.E. Clark was a professor in Indiana. 2 fossil human teeth. We now have 3 human teeth in the same rock layers as dinosaur tracks. We also have 1 human finger in the same rock layers dinosaur tracks. It's the 4th finger of a girl's left hand, her ring finger. That 1 digit has been found in the same rock layer as dinosaur tracks, and that's at the museum too. So 3 human teeth actually, but 2 in this particular scene. The 9-foot 8-inch codified root section of the Lepidodendron fern, a scale tree. That's usually found in Carboniferous rocks, 350 million year rocks, not Cretaceous rocks, not limestone. Supposedly coal forms in swamps. Limestone is a ocean sediment, is a marine sediment. So that's kind of unique. A fossil reptile jaw, fossil coprolite, that's like dinosaur dung. Tells the paleontologist what the creature ate. And some turtle bones. So a mixture of stuff there. In the lower right corner, you see Dr. Carl Baugh examining the 3-toed dinosaur track adjacent to the Clark print. A 14-inch long, 5 1/4 inch wide left human print. Dr. Don Patton said this in 1992. He said, we had some from the Dallas Crime Lab forensic department examine this, and their conclusion was without doubt that this was a human track. So a secular law enforcement agency analyzed it and said, this is a genuine human print. Can you see the 3-toed dinosaur track? You can actually see 1 toe there, 2nd toe, 3rd toe, even a claw mark right there of the Acrocanthosaurus, and then here's the human print coming across. We have found we found human prints outside dinosaur tracks, beside dinosaur tracks, overlapping dinosaur tracks, and in dinosaur tracks. There. This is my good friend, Tannen Judkins. He is now 20 years old. He's one of the custodians of the Creation Evidence Museum. He's the workhorse because he's a young, strapping young man, and Dr. Baugh has him do almost everything, all the heavy lifting of the museum, he does. Okay? But right here, he's like 4 or 5 years old. This is back in 2007. Here, so he's on the cover of this book, The Biloxi River Dinosaur Controversy. Here's the Acrocanthosaurus print. Here he's kind of bathing in a Sauroposeidon print. There. The 2 different types of dinosaur prints that are in the area. There's actually a 3rd type of print in Glen Rose, and some type of iguanodon, or hadrosaur, some type of ornithopod, if you're familiar with that. Okay, here's the quote that mentions Brontosaurus. This is by A. Wilder Smith, 1975. I was in high school during this time. I didn't know anything about creation science because I was in the public school system there, but I bought this book, Man's Origin, Man's Destiny, which I still have there, and A. Wilder Smith basically had 3 PhDs. British organic chemist, young earth creationist, 3-time PhD recipient, A. Wilder Smith, now deceased, succinctly emphasized the profound implications of scientific evidence verifying man's contemporaneous presence with dinosaurs, and he said the following. Find clear tracks of dinosaurs, Brontosaurus, and possibly a Tyrannosaurus, have been found in the Biloxi riverbed near Glen Rose, Texas, which identify the formation there as Cretaceous. Now, those dinosaur names have changed now, but the Brontosaurus and the Tyrannosaur Those models down here at the very bottom, you can still see at Dinosaur Valley State Park when you go. They're life-size models. They were part of the, I think, 1964 World Fair. And the Sinclair Oil Company had like 7 life-size dinosaurs. Texas got these 2 because supposedly we had brontosaurus and tyrannosaur footprints. And so State Park, I think, bid on those and won those in auction, and they're still there. It says here, it would seem to be clear that a human being made the tracks at about the same time as the dinosaur, which is, according to evolutionary doctrine, frankly absurd. If this one observation were true, the whole structure of Darwinism and a good deal of modern geological theory, too, would fall to pieces. That was mid-70s, 1975. Here in 1989, now we're going to let the evolutionists say their piece now. Nova TV special. We had Nova cameras. Glen Rose had Nova cameras actually rolling when we were lifting limestone ledges up to expose the human prints. So there's no way they could say those are fake because they were there when they were basically limestone was taken off the top of them. Dinosaur footprints side by side with humans. Finding them would counter evidence that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. And yet we have dinosaur and human prints together. 1993, Louis Jacobs from Southern Methodist University, SMU. He says this: co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs, such an association would spell an Earth with vast antiquity. Right? Would argue against an old Earth or a young Earth. The entire history of creation, including the day of rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. Evolution would be vanquished. I don't know about you, but having somebody from Southern Methodist University say the Genesis myth, it just curls my hair. Okay? It is not a myth. It is actual historical account. They're written by eyewitnesses, I believe. Ernst Mayr, Harvard, 2012 now. Getting a little closer. Now we're in the 21st century. He says, creationists have stated that humans and dinosaurs were contemporaries in time. Were this momentous statement true, the names of its discoverers would thunder down the corridors of time as individuals who made one of the most outstanding discoveries of the 20th century. We should be hearing, Carl Baugh, Don Patton. Right? We should be hearing those names. Instead, these gentlemen have been set up for ridicule and humiliation and embarrassment, and fortunately they have not given in to the ridicule. Yes?
Once I heard Dr. Patton when he was speaking cite that quotation, and he said, "We thank Dr. Mayer for his compliment."
That is something Dr. Patton would say. Okay? So, the longest continuous series of dinosaur tracks in the Western Hemisphere has Dr. Don Patton's name attached to it. The Turnage-Patton Trail here. You notice the research of this map, the documentation of all this is by Aaron Judkins. That's the book that we're trying to promote tonight. If you're interested in this particular topic, dinosaurs are moving this direction. Water flow is moving this direction. Okay. Crossing the dinosaur tracks are this human trail, named after Aaron Judkins, the Judkins Trail, and then the Taylor Trail right here, named after Stan Taylor. Between, there's an erosion area of no footprints of about 56 feet. There. But this is the longest continuous series of tracks in the Western Hemisphere. This is not the longest dinosaur trackway in the world. Far from it. There are a lot longer tracks in Turkmenistan, part of the ex-Soviet Union. We'll talk more about that next time.
That's 527 feet total, huh?
527 feet is the total length. There's some pictures of it. And you notice how deep these sauropod prints are. You can't see the bottom of them because of the shadow there. The upper portion of the Turnage-Patton Trail was originally discovered in 1971 by the late Mike Turnage. He was able to place his feet in over 100 of the dinosaur footprints while walking in chest-deep water. There are 157 prints, but he was able to find 100 of them walking in the river. The continuing trail was never seen by human eyes until geologist Don Patton and his crew pumped the area dry and began the current exposure of the tracks in the year 2000 during the summer drought. September, October is when it was actually documented, photographed, mapped, all that kind of stuff. The Creation Evidence Museum team continued the exposure of the trackway and extended it to its current length. Sucking water off, of course the evaporation of the drought did a lot of that, but the residual water was sucked off by machines and vacuums and all that kind of stuff in order to get as much water off as possible. In honor of Don Patton as the academic sponsor of the extension of the trail, the Creation Evidence Museum named it the Turnage-Patton Trail. The trackway was re-exposed during the drought of 2022 last year. Maybe you remember this. It made the big news, it made national news. In fact, they misrepresented this trackway. They said that this is a newly discovered trackway because of the drought last year. And that, whoa, look how many tracks are here, dinosaur footprints are here. They did not mention 1971. They did not mention September, October 2000, when the creationists were actually discovering this trackway. They did not mention the two human trails that crossed the dinosaur tracks. We had people come to the museum last summer, and that's like, where are the tracks mentioned on the news? And we said, you're not going to be able to see them. They're on state property, but they're not in the state park. And they're not accessible to the public. And so the news was saying, they made a big deal out of it, and people were flocking to the museum asking about those tracks. And we said, sorry, we can show them our map, which we have at the museum, and we can show photographs of the tracks, but they can't actually see the real ones. Dr. Don Patton, David Bassett, maybe you know them, examined over 100 Acrocanthosaurus attercensis tracks in the dry Fluxia riverbed. Ripple marks in the freshly exposed limestone show that water was flowing over the lime mud while the dinosaur walked across it. Lime mud or limestone, again, is marine sediment, calcium carbonate. It's like concrete or cement. It's going to set within hours or days at most. There, it's hard as concrete. There's me there in the white shirt, blocking Don Patton from view of Brian Thomas's camera. We know Brian Thomas; he's a NEO speaker and works with ICR. So the three of us were here in October of 2000 on the site. I'm there in the white shirt. Don Patton's head is barely visible above mine. Brian Thomas is the one taking this photo. And the next slide, Don Patton is taking this picture. He's standing on scaffolding up high above the river. And I'm on the left up there. And Brian Thomas, who's taller than me, is up on the right side over there. And you kind of see, and we can use us for scale there. The trackway goes up and then around the bend, top of the picture, up there. And we'll show you that in just a moment. The Turnage-Patton Trail measures 527 feet in length, consists of 157 total tracks. The average depth of the tracks is 6 inches. The average length is 15 inches. 136 continuous tracks are disrupted by an area of extreme erosion measuring approximately 56 feet. That's that break. These 136 tracks, the continuous ones, according to Welsh paleontologist Martin Lockley, pictured here, renowned ichnologist and professor from the University of Colorado, Denver, is the single longest continuous dinosaur trackway existing in the North American continent, right here in Texas.
So why was the dinosaur walking down the middle of the river? Was he fishing?
Well, at that time, it might not have been a river. We had the limestone probably extends past the tree line there. The flood was in pulses. You got to remember that. It's not just continuous rising, just one continuous rising all the way to day 150. It's a transgression and then a regression, and then that brings in limestone, limey mud, allows footprints to be made, and then the water will come back over and then come back out again, farther and farther inland until we get to the last mega sequence at the very top. You don't see any tail drag mark. You don't see the tail dragging on the ground. You see how close the footprints are to each other, the left and right? I mean, they're really close to each other, which means the legs are tucked up under the body like a mammal, not semi-erect like a reptile. And yet we call dinosaurs reptiles, and we classify them as reptiles. But they have a mammalian posture, which distinguishes them from other reptiles.
And did these people die probably within several days of those steps?
I would say so. I would say so. Yeah.
It looks like they might be going uphill, higher ground.
Possibly so. Tim Clary, in his book Carved in Stone, which is the best flood geology textbook out there right now, he says that from New Mexico to Minnesota was an area of high ground he calls the Dinosaur Peninsula. And it looks like dinosaurs were moving from south to north, from New Mexico up to what present day Montana, Minnesota, up there in that area, to escape floodwaters that were coming up from the south. And that paleocurrent direction, the direction of the water motion, all that is done by graduate students in Keene, Texas, at the Southwest, at the Seventh-day Adventist College up there. They are young Earth creationists, and they do good geology work. And they're the ones who are doing all the paleocurrent water direction motion, looking at the rocks. You can kind of tell which direction the water's moving during the flood year. So here we go. This particular point here, you'll see in another picture that's coming up, but the trail goes around the bend here, and the Taylor Trail is way up off the screen.
You said we don't see a tail, should we? I mean, what does that
No,
tell us?
probably not. In the book of Job, talking about Behemoth, it says he sways his tail like a cedar, moves his tail like a cedar, Behemoth does. Cedars are rigid and stiff trunks of these massive trees there. And so when you put a trunk-like tail onto an animal, horizontal like that, he's able, if you look at the bones, the sinews are wrapped together and are able to hold that tail up in the air. So it's not necessarily true that water is buoying up the tail. It could be that the construction of the animal itself is allowing that tail to be held up, and the long neck is the counterbalance in the front to balance the tail in the back. There.
Okay.
Here's the Turnage Patent Trail going into the riverbank right here. That's this curve right there. And then coming off that at a 30-degree angle is the Taylor Trail, which is this set of human prints. 14, 11.5-inch left, right human prints crossing the dinosaur prints, which the mainstream media failed to mention last summer. Aaron Judkins there, you see the back of him. He's our model for human scale. All right. So what you saw was the tracks curving off to the riverbank, and then here's the Taylor Trail right here. I'm not sure you can see those little dots. That's where the human prints are. So this is where I'm going to end tonight. Here's the book again, another picture of Aaron Judkins. Again, his book, he does a good job gathering evidence from all different countries and puts it all in one chapter at the very end of the book. I was expecting human prints like in chapter 2. And I was reading chapter 3, chapter 4. You've got to read all the way to chapter 17 to get there. So if you're interested only in human prints, just jump right into chapter 17 there. But boy, those first 15 chapters, scathing rebuke of evolution. One of the extreme tongue lashings of evolution I've ever read. And anyway, it was just great fun reading all that. So
I think you can stop it, Alan.
he sells his book from the website. And speaking of books, I've got a box here. I think I have 8 copies left of a children's book, which the museum is giving away free. If you have grandchildren, or if you have nieces and nephews who could benefit from a creation book, it's animated, please help yourself. I'd be glad to take an empty box back to the museum